But let me first start off just by saying a big thank you and a welcome to this webinar that we're doing for PR and communication professionals who do freelancing. And this basically is on work and well-being. Now, this is brought to you by the CIPR's Independence Network, which I'm a co-founder alongside my colleague Dom, and we'll both be chairing today. And Women in PR, which I am a committee member for, and Sarah is the vice president, and we've got Jane is also a committee member as well. So we are bringing this together because obviously, you know, we are facing some really unprecedented times at the moment. So with coronavirus and, you know, COVID-19, it has a massive impact on everybody, as we know. I mean, the world is literally on lockdown. And, you know, one of the key fallouts or, you know, the key cohorts that have been impacted by this are the self-employed, which make up around 5 million people in the UK, and they contribute around 350 billion to the UK economy. Now, sadly, for a lot of freelancers and independents, you know, we have basically had it really hard in the sense of it being hard hit. Many have had their lives almost turned upside down. You know, just a month ago, you had a thriving business, and then, you know, within weeks, you've got no more contracts. I know, Nigel, I'll ask you to speak a bit about your survey you did shortly, but we know that Nigel did a survey with Intuit Research, and they basically found that, you know, was it 2/3 of the freelancers in the industry had been impacted and weren't really being supported by any of the packages that are on offer from the government. And also found that around 60% of those had already lost half or almost all of their income. And if you look at the CIPR's website, they have some really interesting anecdotal evidence as well, where you've had freelancers come on and share where, you know, they've actually lost everything within, you know, a week, or, you know, not able to get any help. So this, you know, webinar, the idea of it is to try and spread some joy, some insight. We know that, you know, it's definitely not going to be all, you know, as I say, strawberries and cream, but we know that, you know, let's be a bit realistic. We want to give some of our freelancers some insight into what's happening and moving forward. So in terms of how we're going to run it, Dominic's going to be doing the first part of the agenda. So we're going to be covering 3 main topics, which is the current situation, where we are now. We've got, you know, forward thinking, what do we do next? And then we've got, of course, well-being as well, you know, and using your skills to build that up and what you can be doing with the time that we've got at the moment. So what I will do is hand over to you guys to do your introductions first before I actually hand over to Dominic. So let's start with Sarah. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. So hi everyone, my name is Sarah Sammy. So I have 2 hats. I'm Vice President of Women in PR. I'm also Group Head of Comms for Lloyd's Register, which is essentially a compliance and assurance, safety and risk organisation that covers the maritime, shipping, energy, food supply chain, you name it, every city you can imagine we sort of touch. In terms of my background, I've had 20 years in PR. The grey streak is really helping now that everyone realises that I have got 20 years in. I've done exactly I've done exactly 10 years private sector and 10 years public now. 5 years in agency, but 15 years client side. So I think really my contribution on this call is obviously wearing my Women in PR hat, but also from the organisation perspective, really. But thank you for having me.
Thank you. So she's our employer voice, which is great. And we go to Olivia.
Hi, so my name's Olivia Freeman, working for Elwood Atfield. So we recruit to communications and public affairs roles, and I head up our interim practice, so recruit to both day rate positions and fixed term contracts across both the public and private sector. We recruited Sarah to an interim role initially at Lloyd's Register. So I'm here to provide insight into what it's like for contractors working in the current market, and hopefully some industry insight too from a recruitment perspective.
And over to Rohan.
Hi, thanks for inviting me on today. Real pleasure to be here. So I'm co-founder of Reuben Sinclair. We recruit specifically into PR, marketing and digital across all sectors really. We've been going for 13 years, based in London, predominantly permanent recruitment. So 85% of what we do is perm, with the remaining being interim and freelance. Here today really to give an idea around certainly the permanent marketplace, but maybe if you're looking to make a transition, but also our take on what markets are being, what markets are proving buoyant at the moment, if any, and what our experience of the freelance market is like at the moment as well.
Thank you. And over to Alice.
Hi, my name's Alice Waitman. I am the, well, actually I wear two hats as well, although I feel like I'm wearing more than two at the moment. But I'm the CEO and co-founder of WorkCrowd. It's an online marketplace that connects businesses directly to freelancers. So we've built up a community of over 6,000 vetted freelancers, and projects are posted on the platform and are instantly shortlisted to the top most suitable freelancers. I'm also the founder of Hanson Search, which is a global headhunting business in PR and communications. So happy to share any insights and trends on the market and offer advice to freelancers during these difficult times.
Thank you. And Jane?
Thank you. Just to buck the trends, I've got a couple of hats on as well. So Women in PR committee member. I'm a people consultant and trainer over the last 2 years. I do probably 60-70% of my work in the communications and or creative industry space. And a lot of that is around wellbeing and overall sort of people strategy. I'm also 2 days a week head of people and culture at a young agency called Hanbury Strategy. And they're mainly political polling, public affairs and communications. And delighted to have Rohan and Alice on the call because they're supporting Hanbury currently, so keeping it in the family. And prior to starting my consultancy a couple of years ago, I was at Golin for 15 years, so and Firefly prior to that. So I probably spent about half of my career frontline comms, mainly in the B2B space, and then the latter half of my career an enlightened shuffle into the people space.
Great, thank you. George?
Hi there, I'm George Blizzard. I co-founded the PR Network, a virtual PR agency. Some of you may know my work wife, my job share, Nikki Regazzoni. Currently we work across 40 countries with around 2,000 freelance associates or boutique agencies for a range of clients, Purple Bricks, Western Digital, Workday, a number of others, small and large, and yeah. Also, I'm here with two hats. Obviously, I'm here to give the perspective of virtual agency and working with freelance associates, UK and internationally, but also as a working mum. I'm currently also homeschooling year 1, year 8 and GCSEs. So it's a busy time.
Definitely. Thank you. And Nigel?
Hello, everybody. Excuse me. I'm Nigel Sarberts. I'm the founder of the PR Cavalry. Similar sort of model to Alice. And my background is PR consultancy. Been in consultancy, running agencies until about 10 years ago. My last big consultancy job was running the brand marketing business of Burson in London and Manchester, which is where I'm based. So perhaps I can give a regional perspective as well as a London or national perspective. And since the last few years, was freelancing, and then excuse me, set up the PR Cavalry to be a meeting place between clients and freelancers, and not really wearing two hats, but I suppose half a hat in that I also run the Freelance PR's Facebook group, which has about 3,500 members in it, and that was instrumental in doing the survey that we did. Great,
thank you very much. And just to flag that we are recording this, so we can share it for wider distribution as well. And just to give you a little introduction from myself, I kind of skipped over myself, okay? I'm an independent practitioner. I have over 15 years experience in PR and communications. I set up myself as self-employed in 2013, so a good 2 years ago. And I've been independent ever since, usually working with my own clients, but I do tend to do some freelancing here and there. I've done some things for the WorkCrowd. And, you know, I've done things here and there, but yeah, I'm a PR person, love it. But I also have a entrepreneurial hat where I actually do a few other things, which I might get to speak about at the ending when we talk about, you know, using your time wisely for other aspects. But thank you guys for the introduction. Thanks to the wonderful panel. And of course, heading over to Dominic to do introductions and to take it forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, just to introduce myself. So my name is Dominic Ridley-Moy and I co-chair the Independence Network along with Ebony. So just a bit about my background. I've worked in marketing and PR and latterly around sort of behaviour change for about the past 20 years or so. So fortunately, you don't see my grey hair unless I kind of turn my head. So it's quite a good angle for my hair at the moment. But yeah, I've kind of worked for mainly in the public sector, local authorities, housing associations, that kind of arena, and have been freelance now for about 3 or 4 years. So we're just going to kind of kick off. I'm going to ask all of the panel to just talk a little bit about the current situation, about how it's impacted the sector and recruitment, that kind of thing, and just share their thoughts. So I'll come to each of you in turn. I'll kick off with Nigel in a second. Yeah, I think just to say, so if you can access the web chat, which some of you have already posted to already, do post questions as we go along. There's going to be roughly 3 sections. We'll talk about the current situation, particularly in light of what the Chancellor announced or didn't announce recently. Also a bit about the next steps, and then kind of maintaining your mental health and well-being. So yeah, do post any questions as we go along. So if I can come to, I'll go to Nigel first, and I think it'd be really useful if you could kind of help set the scene. And along as Ebony said with Intuit Research, it's been really helpful to see the research that you've pulled together, and that's been especially helpful from a CIPR point of view, to think about how we lobby government and where we go from here, to push for a fairer deal for freelancers and particularly company directors who are adversely affected. But I'll let Nigel say a bit more about that. Nigel?
Okay, if you want to get the full copy of the research document, it's on the PR Cavalry LinkedIn page, downloadable PDF. The headlines from it, this is a survey of around about 300 freelancers done in April. About half have already lost over 60% of their income, and the effect was very, very rapid after the pandemic began. 2/3 of the people who responded don't qualify for any sort of support at all, largely because they're company directors. And 6 in 10 of the freelancers are the main household earner, which surprised me a little bit. It must be said. Half have limited companies, so they get no support at all from the Chancellor's measures. And about half are considering leaving freelancing altogether. Whether that is still true, I don't know. And interestingly, until COVID-19, about half of the freelancers who responded were forecasting quite significant income growth of over 20% this year. So there was a lot of good feeling going into the pandemic, and then the shutter came down basically, and it's come down very, very quickly. About 31% of the respondents have already lost over 80% of their income, and a further 18% have seen income fall by 60 and 80%. So, essentially almost half of freelancers have seen a massive drop in their incomes. I think moving on from there, and just quick praise for the CIPR in what they've been doing. I mean, we've been working with them and providing them this data, and been working very closely with them to try and lobby the government to improve the deal for freelancers. Frankly, I don't think there's going to be much more movement coming this way. The opportunity was yesterday, and nothing seemed to come forward. So I think that's about our lot for the freelancers market. But I'd be interested to see what other people have to say about the prospects of a better deal. But I don't think there's much coming down the track.
I was just going to, can I just chip in there, Nigel?
Yeah,
I'd be interested to hear people's views, because I was having a chat with CIPR this morning and where we go from here. And I think it's interesting because obviously the furlough scheme's been extended until October now, and whether or not that presents an opportunity to lobby further, and the scale and the length of what's happening will make any difference, and whether or not there's an opportunity to revisit it because of that as an angle and a way forward.
Views of the group.
I was going to say, does anyone want to come in on that? Alice, did you want to add anything at all?
Sorry, what was your question in terms of?
I was just wondering whether or not, with the Chancellor's announcement, basically, and saying that the furlough scheme is going to be extended until the end of October, whether or not there's any opportunity there to lobby further, and I suppose whether there's any movement on basically kind of pushing for a better deal, particularly for company directors who are working on themselves or with one or two others.
Yeah, I mean, we're all in this really tough time, whether you're working permanent or freelance, and the government obviously is provided a cushioning for individuals who are on a permanent basis. But I think, all businesses are being hit, and whether that's per and freelance. And, the forecast that Nigel were talking about, I mean, if I look at across both our businesses towards the end of the year, we were up by 30% on the perm side. We were up in terms by 40% on the freelance side. So we were all forecasting this great time. And then it hit really hard. And I think there's been a real shockwave that's gone across the recruitment industry from a perm side and a freelance side. However, I don't want to try and be that. I'm never a pessimistic person. I always think you have to be relatively optimistic. And I absolutely think we need to continue lobbying government to support freelancers and company directors, because they have different situations, and we need to support these small businesses. And freelancing is really as a future. It's predicted by 2027 to be 50% of the workforce. So it really makes up a huge percentage already of current workforce. So the government does need to look after these individuals and needs to look after SMEs. However, I think data would be really interesting if the survey was run again. I think things are changing constantly, very, very quickly. And I see that on a perspective and on a freelance. So already the last 2 weeks, we've had double the amount of projects posted on the platform than we did 2 weeks prior to that. So it's a really turbulent time that we're in. I'm not saying that suddenly we're coming out of this, but I do think there was an initial shock wave that went through. Businesses just instantly, did some culling, and freelancing was the easiest individuals to get rid of. However, I think things will start unfolding, and already because we can track the projects that come on and track also freelancers, and it's a hard time for freelancers to pivot to perm. So that's not necessarily the solution. But yes, continue to lobby government. But I do think there may be what we're experiencing, some green shoots coming through, and some demand, a little bit more demand for freelance projects.
Nigel, I'll just bring you in quickly. Is that a similar situation to you? How have you seen, has things improved from your point of view? Sorry,
absolutely.
George afterwards.
Yeah, or almost mirror image. Yes, complete. Went into the deep freeze for a few weeks, but then things are coming back. The only thing that I find is different is that a lot of projects are going onto our platform, but then they're kind of fading away a little bit. Of budgets being pulled after clients have started searching, and even after they've shortlisted freelancers on the platform. So there's a lot of volatility. I mean, there's a lot of volatility in the market anyway, which I think was strategically good for freelancers, because I think freelancers and volatility are good bedfellows, because freelancers are adaptable, resourceful, energetic people, and they fit in well to a volatile market. But I can see a sense that the clients are saying, yes, we want to bring resource back in, but then are pausing the projects almost before they've begun. So there's the kind of new volatility. I think broadly, like Alice, I'm an optimist, and I think that don't ask me for a particular time frame, but I think in a short number of months, I think you'll see the capacity opening up again. And I think at that point, freelancers are going to be incredibly valuable, because the phrase I keep using is people don't run in the fog. People are not going to say, okay, we're coming out of the back of this. We feel the green shoots are there. Let's just reset to our hierarchies, our structures, our processes that existed in January. Nobody's going to do that. People are going to take the lessons painfully learned over the last few weeks and months and adapt. They're going to change the way they're working. And I think that's where freelancers will have a huge value. Again, it's that flexible, resourceful DNA that freelancers have, which I think fits into that volatile workplace. So I think, yes, a brighter future in a few months, but not just yet.
Well, I suppose it's good to hear that things are at least starting to move in the right direction, and that's certainly been the experience from my case in being a freelancer. If I could I'll just bring in George if you wanted to say a few words about the current situation. Then Olivia, I see you've got your hand raised, so I'll come to you after that. Did you want to say a few words, George?
Yeah, really similar. So we had our best ever year last year. Second fastest growing agency on the back of working in this virtual method with all these amazing freelancers. And then obviously this year it's been a very different situation. We're spread across multiple sectors, and I think that has helped in terms of our client programs. But initially, consumer brands completely pulled back budget, cancelled things. The Olympics going was a huge factor for us. So things that were on the long-term pipeline died overnight. Technology and B2B has continued to be quite stable, which is good. So very similar, who knows what you can predict. It's very much a week-by-week basis. That said, Nikki and I set this up in 2005, and we went through the 2008 recession. We had a really good year off the back of that. There was a lag, but we found that actually people turned to freelancers. They turned to this new model as a way to come out of it. And I don't know, someone recommended it to me yesterday, Roaring Through the Recession. It's an HBR, Harvard Business Review article. It's really old, it's 2010, but it's really pertinent to this. And it's about how you can set yourself up and how brands can set themselves up to do things in a much more innovative way. And I think this will happen again. I think people will look at how they can streamline work practices, how they can be more innovative. And I honestly, truly believe freelancing will be at the front of that, having a much more flexible, agile workforce. It will come into play. We just need to work out that lag. That's kind of my view.
Yeah, and I think certainly in the public sector, that seems to be the case, that kind of, I think there's more of an appetite to use freelancers. It's just kind of working out. I think certainly in the public sector, it's just working out what's going to happen next, and getting them on board and working that through, which obviously takes a bit of time. Olivia, if I could come to you next to say a few words.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. There are some very desperately sad stories out there, and I've spoken to a number of people who have had work, pipeline has dried up, and a lot of people are feeling particularly anxious during these uncertain times. In terms of what we've seen as a business, so a lot of our permanent recruitment did go on hold, but a number of those roles did actually turn interim. So there was an opportunity there whereby there was hope that actually, yes, the longer term projects were put on hold, but the money didn't disappear. The challenge for us was actually, how do you onboard these people? How do you get the recruitment process moving quickly? And actually that was an opportunity for making a case for bringing in a contractor, because we found decision makers were actually quite happy to extend an offer after one round of, interviews via video conference, in a way that there was a reluctance or a hesitation to do so on the permanent side of things. Another positive story was that I entered a few webinars with regards to how you furlough contractors in anticipation of having to do that for a number of our day rate interims, and actually we haven't had to do that at all. And actually we've had a few contract extensions come through, and this is across the board again. Similar to George, we recruit to across both public and private sector, but also all disciplines, so internal communications and external communications, and operational roles and strategic positions. And actually I found that particularly hopeful, and a sign, a reflection that yes, these we may not work on the front line, but actually communications is highly valued and you need people with that skill set at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Rohan next, just to say, have you got similar thoughts? What are your views on how things are at the moment?
Yeah, ultimately very, very similar. Look, I think as a recruitment business, we lost 80% of the permanent vacancies that we were recruiting for. The market wasn't great, generally speaking. We had starters that were delayed, pushed back. We had people that were in rebate periods that were unfortunately let go, so companies could get their rebate back. And this continued for a period of time. I think the extension of the furlough was an interesting thing, because I think the initial furlough meant that whilst people were able to maintain their employed position, companies held off from, whilst they've got staff on furlough, they won't want to be seen to be recruiting. Certainly it will send out the wrong message. So the extension of the furlough was an interesting one, because whilst I think it's great for individuals, if you're not benefiting from the furlough in any sort of way, there may be an extension of the prolonged lack of recruitment. So I think we do need to bear that in mind and make provisions for that. What I do think, though, is that very similar to the recession, as we come out of this, the people that will be first in demand and high in demand will be freelancers, because there will still be a level of trepidation, there will still be a level of cautiousness, and actually getting people on short-term contracts will be the first people that will see a spike. So that's my general view. Okay,
great, thank you. Jane, if I could come to you next, just to I suppose paint it from the picture of the kind of freelancer consultant's perspective.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking as everyone else is speaking from a couple of different perspectives, and as I guess looking across different employers, and with my own experience a couple of days a week, I think where my head was going was I agree with pretty much everything everyone said. I think freelancers are quite obviously in an excellent position for as and when needs arise. I was also thinking, actually, not giving away all our secrets, that there is some demand and there is some need in terms of recruitment at Hanbury, and our perspective has been either freelance and or temp to perm. So where my head was going, and I wondered if any of the other panelists had any sort of data or anecdotal perspective of the percentage of people who badge themselves as freelancers and independent in a regular world, how many of those would be open to consider temp to perm? Because that's broadly, I think, from myself as an employer, and as I say, looking across it as a consultant, that's one of the conundrums that people might have, that, okay, it looks like in the short and medium term, my numbers are okay. It looks like I've got steady growth or a big client in this space. So ordinarily I would be recruiting, but what are my choices now? And I think the choices are freelance, or it could be, I'm going to give you a 3-month contract. Hopefully that'll be made perm, but I can't tell you, as yet. So thinking about the constituency here, those people that consider themselves freelance, how many would consider perm in this sort of setup? So I kind of answered with a question, Dominic. That's cheeky, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, does anyone want to pick up on that point at all?
Jane, I'm happy to respond to that. And two things. It was interesting what Rohan said about the furloughing as well. So yeah, obviously when people are short of work and they're worried, then I think people will look at temp to perm as an option. But you do get career freelancers, and so I think that's where they're sort of having to weigh that up. But, if a company is not going to give them also the certainty of a permanent job, then actually they might think, okay, it works both ways. So I will give them the certainty of 3 months, but then I might want to go back to my freelancing rather than a perm contract afterwards. But, people do move between perm and freelancing, and you do see that sort of evolution in people's careers, or not even evolution, just movement based on their current situation. And I think, when people are furloughed, what I found quite interesting is that they can freelance and they are allowed to go and work for other businesses. So I'm kind of interested to see if that starts happening, if individuals, say in agencies, have been furloughed, whether they start actually freelancing to pick up some additional work. So that could happen subject to the contractual arrangements. But as Rohan mentioned, the longer people are furloughed, I do feel it is slowing the economy down a little bit. And I think they need to make a decision, and then that's what's going to sort of boost it on again. So this sort of situation where we're in at the moment, where there is furloughing happening, there's no hiring happening, therefore it's hard to get people to move. And I think there's certainly a fear on the permanent side of that movement and getting people to move. However, the freelance market is much more fluid. People are used to kind of that sort of taking on a couple of contracts and working in a very different, agile way.
I do think from the announcement on the extension of the furlough, it looks like maybe from July onwards, or certainly from July onwards, people will be allowed to work part-time. And I think as the full-time employees come back on a part-time basis, companies may look to fill that gap through employing freelancers. So it'll be interesting to see what happens from July onwards for the freelance marketplace. Hopefully we should start to see some more demand because of the gap that there might be from the part-time workers.
Thank you. So if I could just bring you in just to share your thoughts on the current situation, and then we've got a couple of questions which we'll go to after that.
Yeah, of course. So obviously my perspective is coming from an employment perspective. Although what I will share, as Olivia mentioned, I actually went into LR, an interim contractor last year, and then accepted the permanent role a month later. And I'm happy to apply later on. But in terms of what we've seen as an organisation, obviously we're a global organisation, so the focus really was on Wuhan from the very beginning. Lots in terms of our comms, very much focused on internal communications and crisis. It's clearly a really anxious time for us as an organisation, not just for the comms and marketing teams, but also across the whole of the business. And if anything, we're having to really prove our worth. There's a lot of pressure on us in terms of making sure we demonstrate value for every penny that we spend. So from our perspective, a lot of the big projects that we were working on, they've stalled. LR is a very big organisation, so we tend to rely on working with the bigger agencies. The only contract that I have been able to keep is my social media consultant. And I think there's a positive there for independent practitioners, because this particular individual has an awful lot of experience, and that's why I was able to kind of keep him on. Obviously the direction we had was to kind of pause and really essentially keeping the lights on. As an organisation, we want to demonstrate that we're open for business. One of the positive things, I think, sort of fed us up around digital transformation, and it means really being able to demonstrate to our clients that we have remote solutions. So that's actually been a real benefit, and there's been a lot of work within, closer. So we're very marketing led, so a lot of close working amongst the PRs and the marketeers. But we've also had staff on furlough as well. So all of the kind of, slightly different impact within an organisation, but the same level of anxiety really in terms of the future of work. I mean, I think that's the thing. It's so unpredictable. We don't really know what's going to happen. So it's trying to see where the opportunities are in the crisis. And then for me personally, because obviously I've worked in the public sector, so I know what it's like when you don't have very much money, and therefore I can be quite industrious with a small budget. I think that the positive, as I think you've all kind of mentioned, is probably in the next couple of months where things start to settle down. And actually I think lots of organisations where they may very well have been going out to the bigger agencies because they've had their budgets cut, they may be more likely to consider freelance practitioners, whereas before they might have not have had the appetite to, because they are, and this is me being very frank, it's because some organisations want to work with the bigger named agencies, and that's what they're used to. So the idea of working with an independent practitioner hasn't necessarily crossed their mind, whereas I think a lot of organisations will be going down that route. It's just how to get them there. It's part of the process.
I think that's a really interesting point, just thinking about how we raise the profile of independent practitioners, and also just think about what the opportunities are as well as the threats, and how we can turn that to our advantage. There's a couple of questions we've had in, so we'll just take those, and then I think we'll move on to the next section. I'll hand over to Ebony for that. So one of the questions was around the excess supply of freelancers on the market at the moment, obviously, and whether people are negotiating down day rates, and just how that's affecting people at the moment. So does anyone want to chip in with that, and what the effect has been on day rates at all? Anyone on the panel?
Yeah, I mean,
go on, Alice, sorry.
So I mean, we haven't noticed that. I mean, I think on our platform, it's an open platform. We don't dictate pricing levels. We don't put a bartering system in, which can encourage prices to go down. And we always believe quality, you have to pay a price for, and if you don't pay much, you might not get a great service or quality of work. I mean, I've noticed, though, more agencies putting together packages, because I think they're finding it quite tough because they've got X number of employees, and they're putting together sort of packages for SMEs and tech startups, for example. And, of course, in a competitive market and people are short of work, then it does drive different price levels. But we haven't noticed clients sort of hustling more on price yet. I think people are trying to be a little bit more sensitive, and if they want some great work done, then they want a good individual. So I haven't noticed that. We haven't noticed that yet on our platform. So hopefully that won't happen, because I think, that sort of starts a bit of a spiral effect, and you end up with the best person, you're going on price. And we always advise never go on price, but go on expertise.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that'd be a race to the bottom, that scenario. All our people are 20 plus years experience, so that comes with a price. And I think when you're competing, perhaps as Sarah talks about, with an agency, that's already a really cost-effective solution, having a freelance consultant or a virtual agency. So I think you wouldn't need to. Well, let's hope that isn't the case, and certainly nothing I've seen to date suggests that.
Nigel, were you going to come in?
Having expectations of clients a little bit soft on price. The people are looking for bargains, but I think that will just work its way through, because people won't accept. Well, some people would accept work at rock bottom rates, but they won't be particularly successful engagements. So I think, temporary softness on price and people driving a harder bargain, but overall, I don't think that's going to be an issue. It was just one couple of thoughts on the future. Was talking to actually a global executive search guy the other day. He made an interesting observation to me, which I thought was interesting. Was that a lot of his clients are 200 to 300 employee type businesses, and he said that things like looking for new chairs, looking for new NEDs, that's just gone. That's over. For the time being, they're not doing any work. But he said that a lot of his clients are in regulated industries, financial particularly, does a lot of work in fintech, that sort of area. And he said that the feeling he's getting from the market is quite interesting. And he said that the regulatory calendar doesn't stop, and the work is just backing up and backing up and backing up. And they haven't got people in at the moment because of furlough. So there's a huge kind of pipeline of work still to come through, because the calendar hasn't stopped. And he said the other interesting thing is that a lot of his clients are planning for much higher sickness rates. Normally they would say, okay, well, 7% or something like that of our employment is simply sick at any given time. And they're planning for that to be more like 25% for the next year or so. So there's just going to be a big capacity need, which again, is a huge thing for freelancers to get into. So I think there's a kind of interesting pull side of the argument that these demands will pull the demand through for freelancers. And I think from the push side of the equation is that I would say to any freelancers, tuning into this is to get busy with your planning and insight work, because everyone's plans that existed in Q1, they're in the bin, and everybody's trying to find new ways of working, new ways, what is the market sentiment in their category, and that, if there's work to be generated, to go to your clients who have maybe wound down requirement and say, well, what are you doing to understand the new realities, the new market sentiment? Can I help you? So I think there's don't wait to be asked. Kind of get stuck in and offer that planning and insight work, because that's going to generate fees for you. Because the need is there. Every organisation is now dealing with a new category norm.
Yeah, and it's how to take advantage of that and I suppose market what you offer, so that you're putting something out there that solves the new normal. Olivia, if I can come to you next with any thoughts from your end.
It was actually a comment on the question around day rates. I mean, I certainly haven't seen any sort of bullying down of day rates, but it is quite a tricky one in terms of how do you price yourself in what is a very competitive market. And obviously it goes without saying that if you're not working, then then there will be a degree of flexibility, and you don't want to outprice yourself, but you also don't want to devalue yourself. And I guess the route or what I've been advising to people when I'm recruiting to positions is I will explain, what budget or what salary or what day rates on offer. But I'll suggest, look, I'll happily put you forward if you're happy with what is on offer. It's good to have an expectation of what you want, but also what your bottom line would be, and to keep it almost as open to negotiation as possible, especially because, again, in my experience, roles are ever changing, and actually the role that you're interviewing for may a week later, depending on what the need or the urgency is, change, and that should be reflected in the day rate. So I think a degree of keeping your options open, having it in mind that it is a competitive market, but also having that discussion once you're in a position to do so is probably advice that I would give.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in on that point at all? Jane?
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Very polite. I was very scholarly there with my hand up.
Sorry, I think everyone had their hand up at once. So.
Oh, really? A bun fight. A couple of thoughts running through my head on the day rates issue. Kind of building on previous comment, I think it may be Nigel's. It's sort of going back to best practice of new business development. If you're keeping ahead of the curve, if you're keeping connected with people that already know you, then I would suggest that would lower the elasticity of any day rate conversations. They can shortcut to, rather than looking at, a saturated market and 8 faces they don't know. If you've connected with them and you've worked with them before, then they're more likely to, to stick with your higher day rate because they know you and shortcut any tricky conversations there. The other thing, and this is pure speculation, of course, because none of us have a crystal ball, but building on Nigel's point about, yes, a lot of employers are expecting and factoring for higher sickness rates. If we extrapolate that and think about the next, couple of months and what we would normally see in a year, obviously we've got summer holidays coming up, and most of us, I think, have a very different landscape in terms of childcare. So from an employer's perspective also, and I'm seeing this amongst my client base, I don't agree with it, but it's happening. People aren't taking their holiday. So there's all sorts of, contradictory potential trends here. However, if like most of us working parents are going to struggle to find childcare over the summer holidays, that could conceivably play well into the freelance market. Fewer people are obviously taking overseas holiday, and that could have a potential knock-on. But I don't have a crystal ball, and I can hear some creeping downstairs.
I was going to say to everyone else, hold that thought for a second. We'll come back to flexible working and holidays all in one question. Sarah, did you want to make a point?
Yeah, all I was going to say is that, as PR people, we have a terrible habit of underselling what we do. To be really good at PR, you have to work really hard, have great ideas, intuition, judgment. And I think the worst thing we should be doing at this time is lowering day rates. What this pandemic has shown is that how important communications really is, and we will make the difference and will make or break these companies in terms of how they survive. And I know it is absolutely unprecedented times, but just from my point of view is that we have to, I think what's great about this call is that we've got loads of recruiters on this call together, and that just kind of shows how actually important it is that as an industry we're confident in what we do. And I think I'd like to get back to that confidence subject matter a bit later on, but I think that's all I want to say is that do not undersell yourself, and don't let organizations not pay you what you're worth, because it's not the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you.
Just
very good point.
Quickly jumping in on that, not to stay on day rate for too long, but there's another model, and I think this is a perfect time to really bring out that other model, which is paying based on project rather than day rate. And a lot of our projects that are posted on the value of the project. So if you've got lots of experience and actually can do that piece of writing much faster, then why not be paid on the project rather than how long it takes you to do it? And I think it sort of just throws it all on the head, and actually what's it worth to the client? If they're a small SME and they can only afford a certain amount, but actually you can do that really fast and you're paying on the project, then be paid on that rather than the actual piece of time it takes you.
I think that's great, Alice. I don't know if anyone's seen that meme that's on LinkedIn that talks about, it might take me 30 minutes, but it's the 10 years experience I had that may allow me to do it in 30 minutes. And again, it goes back into that element that when you've got that 10 years, 20 years experience is, we all know as clients whereby you have and everyone's had this experience where you get an agency in, the founders come in, they pitch to you, and it all sounds incredible. And then once they're bedded in, all you're seeing is the execs, and you're having to train the execs. And I think the beauty of having independent practitioners, that money that you're paying for the work that you're getting back is being done by that independent practitioner. And it's not the elephant in the room, we all know about it. But that's what makes, I think, independent practitioners really, really valuable.
Yeah,
the great podcast.
Did you want to say anything, Ebony? Or?
I'll just unmute myself. No, I agree with everything you just said there, actually. I think that was really interesting discussion points that we've just had there. But I feel like it will be interesting going forward to see how it all pans out. And I do believe that we're going to see an increase in people wanting to use independence.
Okay,
now, did you want to go back to that question on the flexible working?
So we had a question in, and then we'll hand over to Ebony. It was just about flexible working, really, and what we'll see long term, whether this will change the face of flexible working, how employers use their offices or don't use their offices. Just be interesting to get your perspective on that, and also just thinking about anything around the point about holidays. It'd be good to pick up on that and any trends that people are seeing in terms of what employers are doing about holidays or not, as the case may be. So if anyone wants to jump in on that particularly, Jane, if you unmuted yourself, did you want to?
I have unmuted myself. I'm poised and passionate on this front.
Well, over to you.
Unequivocally, yes. And this is thankfully not just my wish. I'm seeing so much evidence. And actually at bedtime last night, I noted that Twitter had come out and said that their staff could work remotely indefinitely. And clearly Twitter would, but I think that will absolutely trickle down. Quite reassuringly, in the fairly recent weeks, I've gone through, and actually Sarah has as well, judging best places to work, PR Week's best places to work, and actually the other one, the other awards. And what was a real joy, because the entries were put in prior to lockdown, and then sort of the process was finalised as we were heading into this strange new world. And what was so enlightening and very, very clear, one, that the best employers were all pretty much really doing flexible working properly now. And two, the best employers that were doing flexible working properly had almost, and I'm being facetious, almost sailed into lockdown because of it. And, Ebony said at the top of the call that she'd been doing this for years, and clearly George has. So I think that the short answer is absolutely. fairly obviously, so many employers are looking at bottom lines right now, and clearly there is a massive upside to doing away with, or at least significantly reducing your cost base for physical office space. The one watch out, and I am an optimist, thankfully I seem to be in good company on the panel, the one watch out is that there is quite clearly a very significantly challenging economic climate out there now, and let's face it, that is going to continue right into next year and possibly beyond. So there could be, the pendulum could swing back a little, where people are really, really keen to keep their jobs and are working in any way, any timetable, any schedule to do that. And there could be some employers who are happy to take advantage of people in terms of working schedules, working hours, and therefore the boundaries slip a little. But my unequivocal answer is yes. I think this is going to be a revelation and a revolution.
Yeah, I think that the proof is there now that it works, that people can be flexible, they can work remotely. I was chatting to an employment lawyer who said actually they think, off the record, that there's, as a working mum, there's no way now that they could ever deny flexible working when people return to work, which is hugely positive. It may not be relevant so much this group, it's kind of cohort, but I think that's an amazing achievement to get that into place with this. But yeah, flexible working, I can't see why people wouldn't embrace it more. I think there is a balance between having a mix of face-to-face in real life, IRL as my daughter would say, but also on Zoom. And I think that's what, it's what we've done for 15 years, is have that balance. It's nice to have the balance. I think we all realise that now that we're all locked up. But yeah, I can't see a negative to it. I really can't.
Can I come in on that?
Mm-hmm.
To build on those sentiments, which I agree with completely, I think there's an opportunity here, perhaps within the group on this call, to try and formalise that in terms of what does a freelancer-friendly employer look like, and try to codify that, and to make that an advantage for agencies or for brand owners to give themselves that mark. I mean, Jane, you mentioned about the criteria for best places to work. How do organisations demonstrate or evidence? How do they set out? What does that mean in terms of here's how we make it flexible workplace, and embrace flexible talent in that, rather than it being, typically hiring a freelancer has been a tactical need. We've got a gap, someone's ill, whatever. Or suddenly a big piece of work has come in, it stretched the capacity of the team. So it's responding to need, rather than saying what is the strategic opportunity of making ourselves freelancer friendly. And that's not only about working from home practice, the day-to-day routine, but it's also things around commitment to paying bills on time, other aspects of freelance life, which are a complete pain in the bum, frankly. And I think that I would be very, very happy, I'd welcome an opportunity to continue that bit of the conversation with the people on this call, to say, how can we enshrine that into what does freelancer friendly look like?
Yeah, I think it's. I think the work from home is going to be a really. We also ran a survey working with the CIPR and the PRCA on the employees' view on COVID-19, and what we found was that 63% of around 400 respondents said that they would definitely like to work from home more frequently. 20% already currently work from home regularly on a day-to-day basis. But there was still 18% that said, no, I want to be in the office day in, day out. And I think what that does say is that there are going to be some people that just can't work from home for whatever reason. They don't want to, or they can't. And so they need to certainly be taken into account. But I think on the flip side, definitely after what's happening right now, there are going to be more and more employers that are going to embrace work from home. They then need to employ people that can work from home. And so it's going to open up the door for more freelancers, because majority of independent practitioners can work from home. They're used to working from home. They work independently. So I think it will open up the door for more opportunities for independent practitioners who have the ability to work from home. They are proven at doing it. And those people that can't work from home, I think, might suffer a lot more in the future, and we need to be mindful of those people too.
Yeah, I think that's the benefit of being a freelancer. That I think that the vast majority, I think something like 70% of PR people primarily work from home. So I think for us it'll be how we use that going forward, and just I suppose that opportunity, and kind of I suppose just thinking about it, there's like a number of freelancers who already do a lot of online courses. So there's lots of people I think who are already set up for this way of working, and I think that's certainly something we bring to the table. And I think it's really useful to think through, certainly from a CIPR point of view, how we can push what it is that we do and sell ourselves, and kind of define what it is that we do. I'm going to hand over to Ebony now. Before we do that, does anyone have any quick final thoughts on the current situation in this section before we move on to the next stage?
To jump in very quickly, we found that clients often, when they're looking for a freelancer, still wanted to insist the freelancer went to an office. And we would say, actually, there's some really good freelancers that if you can be a bit more flexible with them and allow them to work from home, you'd be able to access these individuals. And they were sort of still very single sort of minded that, no, we want them in the office. And I think now, actually, businesses might be a little bit more flexible to those remote freelancers, which are different to the freelancers that go into an office.
Sarah?
Yeah, I was going to just touch on, quickly, and also from an organisational perspective. The organisation that I work for is, I have a habit of doing this, is a very traditional male-dominated environment. And they certainly, from a cultural perspective, were not big fans of working from home. And what's been quite interesting is actually this has kind of proven the point that people can do that. Not all, obviously lots of our frontline people can't, but most of us that are office based are able to do our jobs from home. But I think the big thing is it's about trust, essentially. Trust is a big thing, and it's a cultural thing that some organisations don't necessarily, because they're not used to it, they're used to people coming into the office. So I think if organisations don't change through this process, then that's crazy. We've all proved that we can do this, and I think it's about flexibility, because just touching on what Rohan said, I've got a colleague who absolutely hates working from home, and he's finding it really hard because he doesn't want to be at home and be given jobs by his wife, essentially, which is what happens when he works from home. So I think it's just the real flexibility and agility is about lots of different models that work for different people. So what I'm hoping for is 4-day weeks, 2 days at home, 2 days in the office. That's my ideal. That's what I'm ultimately lobbying for. So if anyone wants to help me,
I'll help with that. Olivia, did you want to come in?
Yeah, it's just a really quick point. I think also from speaking to people, it's broken down, working from home has broken down the hierarchy in organisations, which I think has further enabled people to come in and slot in quite quickly, because as we know, people who come in on a contract basis have to very quickly scope out who the stakeholders are, what the landscape is, and sometimes are met with resistance of people who are working in the organisation. I think this has actually further enabled them to slot in quite naturally, which has helped.
Okay, excellent, thank you. All right, well, I'll hand over to Ebony for the next section, and I'll attempt to answer some of your questions on the chat now as well. And if any of the panelists want to answer any of the questions on the chat as well, do feel free to do so.
Yeah, just raise your hand. I just wanted to quickly touch on the industries that have actually been impacted by the pandemic that, the recruiters in particular have noticed, to give freelancers more of a steer in terms of, do you think that will be the biggest hit at the moment, will be the ones recruiting more? Do you think there's something like the travel industry will recover from what's happening? So a bit of insight around that, and then I'll get on to skill set. So can I pose that question to Alice, please?
I mean, you mentioned travel, and absolutely, probably not one to be at the moment. So yeah, I mean, there was an initial sort of actually shockwave where projects across all industries sort of went on hold. but we're certainly seeing certain areas where remaining quite strong. So public affairs, for example, there is a lot of lobbying that's required to government. Big businesses haven't had the bailout that SMEs have had, so a lot of lobbying is going on there. I know Brexit's sort of been delayed, but that is going to happen. And so, there is still a degree of need for public affairs professionals. And then we've touched on a little bit earlier on in terms of tech, fintech. There's a lot of fraud that's happening. Payment systems. So there are still pockets, fitness, online fitness, e-commerce businesses. I don't know how the rest of the panel, but I don't have very many casual clothes. I wear all sort of office clothes constantly. So my wardrobe during the week, after about 3 days, I ran out of clothes. So casual wear has been, that's had a big increase in demand. So there are little pockets that are coming through. But when I talked earlier about starting to see sort of double in terms of the amount of projects that have been posted in the last 2 weeks. That's actually quite broad across all different industry sectors. And that's from writing projects to some PR. I mean, the PR tends to be a bit more sensitive because I think, reputation and doing too much PR at the moment, I think businesses are a little bit cautious around that. But internal comms, there's been a lot of work, and in crisis comms, a lot of work around those areas.
Okay, thank you. And Rohan, would you say the same?
Exactly the same for me. Yeah, crisis, internal comms, plenty of work, public affairs. We've majority of the clients that have continued recruiting via us are in tech, healthcare. Actually, we've recently made a couple of placements in healthcare. So they're recruiting, and they're looking for more people as well. So that's another market. But everything Alice has said, I'd just be repeating. Yeah. Okay,
cool. And Olivia or Nigel, would you guys add anything to that, or would you say it's the same pretty much across the board?
I think, absolutely. I would echo what's already been said in terms of, I think there's a lot around rewriting narrative and repurpose. So certainly in the immediacy, we're seeing spikes within, as mentioned, health, tech and retail, but also it's less about product, consumer PR, and lots more around sharing information, employee engagement. How do we, speak to vulnerable people? Sainsbury's, for example, how do we speak to vulnerable customers, and sector-wide initiatives? So I think it's certainly, it's easy to pinpoint sectors that are busy and those that aren't, but actually digging a bit deeper, because arguably some of the sectors that have been hit the hardest might be the ones that need the most comms support, and addressing that.
Yeah, that's what I would think as well. Absolutely. And talking about that, what I wanted to speak about was skill set. So, we all know skill set is transferable, but, you're going to have some freelancers out there that maybe are working in a particular industry at the moment. So what kind of advice would you give for those who are looking to reposition themselves for the roles that are actually out there? Because maybe the ones that they were already fulfilling, are not as apparent as before. I'll send that question to Nigel.
Thank you. I mean, as Alice said, if you're in the travel industry, you probably want to get out of it pretty quick, because that market just isn't going to come back for a long time. So, I mean, if you're in a completely dead sector, I mean, how do you transfer? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I wouldn't like to offer a solution to jump from travel into tech or travel into finance. I mean, there doesn't seem to be an obvious route. I think that my answer is more around the margins of how you can migrate, left or right, rather than make a great leap. And it's around improving your listening skills. It goes back to what I was saying before, is that everybody's plan from Q1 is in the bin, and everybody's struggling to try and formulate their strategy for the future, but nobody obviously yet knows what that is. And so I think the only way you can really continue the conversation with an existing client who may be dormant and may not be spending, but you feel that they are worth cultivating that relationship, is to brush up your listening skills, ask questions, and keep listening, and try to help them with their journey of insight, help them with their journey of campaign planning. Because if they're in a sector that's dead, they can't revive it alone. They have to wait for that sector to come back. But they're going to be repurposing their business. They're going to be finding new markets themselves. And freelancers are just in the same boat. They have to go on that journey of repurposing what they do. So if your mindset is transactional, I wait for the phone to call, for the phone to ring, and then I do what I'm told by the client, then you've probably got a fairly bleak few months ahead of you. If your mindset is around, how can I talk to my client and help them along their journey, even if that isn't going to earn me money this week or next, but it's going to develop that trusted advisor role that then produces the goods in a month or 3 months, then that's probably a better place to start mentally, I would suggest.
Anybody else want to chip in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Jane.
No, go on, I'll wait.
I mean, it's a question, actually, we were asked a lot, whether in time of crisis or not, about people do want to move to different industry sectors. And I think the beauty of freelancers is a lot of freelancers have actually worked across multiple different industries at some point, even if it's been one project. And I think also freelancers in PR have got so many different types of skills. So writing, for example, if you're great at writing and you've been writing in travel, you could write in consumer tech. I mean, if you're a great writer, you often can transfer your industry knowledge. You may not have the PR contacts, but there's certain things that you can do. Writing a reputational strategy, internal comms. So I actually think freelancers do need to think, what projects have I ever worked on in that sector? And so long as you've had a project, or even if you haven't, well, what's the project that's most similar to that, and reposition themselves in that way. But a PR person has so many different skills to offer, and I think it's really remembering that, embracing it, and then, as Nigel said, get yourself out there. Do go for those projects. Even start doing some blogging and writing in markets which are very buoyant, to kind of be able to sort of project yourself into that market. So the beauty of PR is that they're communicators, they're good writers, and so I would really say get yourself out there and go for it.
Thank you.
I was just going to build on what you said, actually, Alice. I think individuals need to be a little bit bullish, brush yourself off here, and say, actually, and I think a lot of this constituency have probably had a lot of experience. We're probably not in the main talking about people that are first or second jobbers a few years out. So to Alice's point, almost by definition, you probably have touched a million different disciplines, skill sets and sectors. And I almost feel like it's the sort of advice that you might give to an intern or somebody sort of starting life out, somebody graduating. This is, for many people, an enforced period of slightly, downing tools. So up your profile, do some research, do some reading, do some volunteering. My goodness, there is incredible, creative, brilliant community work happening out there that would look phenomenal if positioned appropriately on your CV or in a conversation. And also, to build on Nigel's earlier point, be listening, be researching. If you've got that time on your hands, I'd almost be a little aggressive, what on earth have you been doing if you've not been using this time effectively to reposition yourself and fill your CV and your interview chat with sort of glittering examples and anecdotes? This is an extraordinary time, therefore fill it with extraordinary experience. And if a PR person can't sell themselves, then I think there's a great opportunity there.
But please don't start another podcast, though.
Olivia, you want to say something?
Following on from what Jane said with regards to volunteering, because we have, Elwood Atfield has a commsvolunteer.org website. It's a volunteering scheme, and we've acknowledged that we can't make ventilators or help on the front line in that sense, but what we do have is a database of communications and public affairs candidates and people who are keen to help, are keen to get involved, and if people aren't working, are very much looking for schemes like this. And it's almost like a matchmaking service whereby we will fit profiles with organisations that really are desperate for either extra pair of hands, or they've got an incredibly tired team who just need that sort of extra support. So far we've helped at least the beginning of May, we'd helped over 50 organisations with over 300 volunteers. So I would strongly encourage anybody that is looking for a scheme or a way to help to look on our website. There's a link to that.
Anybody else want to chip in?
It's sorry. Yeah, it's probably just about the only place I would say, coming back to the day rate thing, is where this is maybe where you could consider your options around how much you're going to charge on your day rate. It would be like me trying to get a plumber in to try and do my garden. Like, if they wanted to transition into that field of work, they'd probably expect me to say, well, I'm going to pay more for someone who's qualified to do this. So the thing is, I think everyone's qualified to do PR in some sort of, as Alice said, I think everyone's got really transferable skills. It's about taking those transferable skills, trying to find where you can transfer that to. Is there something secondary where your primary aspect or your primary focus is right now? Can you make it a secondary focus and focus on something that you may want to transfer into? You can then look at your day rate and try and maybe bring it down slightly, or still demand what you were on. But that's where maybe I would say, if you are looking to transition, think about being a little bit more creative with your options there.
Yeah.
Sarah? Obviously, I've transitioned through all sorts of different disciplines and sectors over the last 20 years. One of my biggest, drums that I bang is the transferable skills that we have as PR people. I've worked from oil and gas, financial services, policing, government, fraud. Yes, that was my ex-role, and definitely that's organisations that work in fraud are doing particularly well. They tend to in big crisis situations. But I think it's using the time. If you're in a situation and you're not working, which is really hard. And I had a period of last year where I had a few months off, and what made a difference to me was the volunteering and everything that really everyone's mentioned. I was blogging, I sat on the board of a local charity, obviously Women in PR. I was obviously able to leave my house to meet people for coffee and network, but I absolutely don't waste that period of time. And don't lose your confidence, because that's the key thing. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that we often undersell ourselves, and we have got transferable skills. And like Nigel was saying, that planning, that insight, when you're in a position to go and sell yourself to a client, make sure you prepare, you understand the industry, and you have the ideas, because that's where PR makes a big difference. It's the ideas and the initiatives that we come up with. And that costs no money. That's just your brain. So it's making sure that you don't, you're doing the right things for your mental health, and you don't lose your confidence. And I think that's where it was an easy transition for me, going into an interim and then into the perm, because I've done all that volunteering, all that work, and especially when you sit on the board as well, you've got that strategic mindset, and also was advising for a social mobility charity. It's almost a little bit like, I know this is the cheesy thing, but thinking of yourself as a brand, like what do you stand for? What are people buying into? And I think from an employer's point of view, when you're recruiting, you want to work with someone who is excellent, can do the job, but also, do you get on? It's the chemistry thing, and chemistry can come across on a face to face or over a phone call, really. So my key piece of advice is just don't lose your confidence, because the jobs will come back. It's just that we're in this really tricky period.
Thank you. George, did you want to add anything?
I think a lot of it's been said. I think perhaps one of the easiest ways to transfer those skills across is from external comms, which obviously is tougher at the minute, particularly media relations, into internal comms. I think we've already touched on it, but there's huge opportunity there, huge growth, uses a lot of the same skills. It's all about sensitive messaging, and looking at exec comms as well. So some of those companies are really struggling in travel and leisure. Airbnb is a classic case. Spectacular comms last week from their CEO, and that's an internal comms person that would have delivered that. So I think, yes, your budgets may have been cut, but be really savvy in how you're talking to those clients that you might be talking to at the moment, about how you can perhaps, I'm desperately trying to think of another word for pivot, but how you can kind of shift your program in another way, using your skills, still delivering for them, and still holding on to those existing clients. I think they're probably in really rocky water at the moment, as well as trying to find new sectors.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So my next question is kind of a double fold. So in the sense of, you mentioned, Sarah, about being able to go out and have coffees and build relationships. I think we're all on lockdown now. So some advice in terms of freelancers to build relationships. How do you suggest we go about building relationships? Obviously there's LinkedIn and things like that. and Zoom as we're doing. But, you know, is any tips that you guys would give? And then secondly, do you think that it's worth, I think it is, you know, independents or freelancers being proactive, offering their services to those who are particularly hard to hit at the moment, you know, as in crisis comms and things like that? Do you think it's worth them being proactive? I always think proactivity is a great thing to do. But in a situation where everyone's in lockdown and not able to go to meet for coffees, go to meet for interviews, or, you know, generally build relationships, what advice would you give? And that's open to anyone on the panel who wants to go first. Shall
I kick it off?
Go for it, George.
I was just going to say, you mentioned LinkedIn, and I think that's really powerful at the minute. I think they've had, did I read yesterday, 26% growth in the last few weeks. I think, you know, don't consider it, obviously there's a lot of recruiters on the platform, so, but don't consider it just a recruitment platform. It really isn't. It's much more than that now. I think they've tried really hard, Microsoft tried really hard to kind of get it to more of an engagement platform, just such as Twitter. I think people are probably a bit tired of Twitter at the minute, and I think LinkedIn's perhaps a more civil place, but I think there's a lot of networking you can do on there. There's lots of groups, there's lots of people you can follow that you can comment and engage on, and there's actually tons of great guys out there giving advice. And Brightside Digital, a guy called Phil, look him up on LinkedIn. He's got lots of tips and handy ways of making LinkedIn work for you, and it isn't just a recruitment platform. It's way more than that, I think, in terms of networking. So that'd be my top tip, and follow Phil.
Thank you. Anyone else want to pop in?
What George said. Essentially, I was going to say that with different words. So, yeah.
Oh, fine.
Can I just come in for a second, just to a slightly different dimension to what George said? Is that if you know, a couple of months ago, or maybe 6 weeks ago, everyone was writing my top tips for working from home. And suddenly it just became vanilla, it became wallpaper. So use LinkedIn as a research tool in that sense. So that if everyone's writing about my top tips for working from home, then don't add to that pile. You know, kind of read what's there and then try to find the angle, try to find the slightly different perspective on something that is playing on everyone's mind, but for God's sake, be original.
Yeah, I've got to say, like, check out Phil, because he talks about the SSI index, which is all new to me, but it's your social selling index, which really shows how you kind of rank versus everyone else in your industry. There's loads of really good tips. Video, he talks about not linking out when you use LinkedIn, so you never attach a link. It should always be photo of it, because they don't like you to link out. There's so many great ways you can use it that I had no idea about until recently, that I think would benefit so many people to just learn how to use it properly, rather than just an article blast, basically, which isn't effective at all.
Just
email blast, I must say. Email blast would drive me a little bit crazy. Sorry, Dom, go on.
I was just saying, sorry, I didn't catch who it was worth following, George, did you say?
The lovely man called Phil Shonshaw.
Okay.
And Brightside Digital.
Okay.
Right, we're all writing that down. Well done.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was going to say, has anyone else got any tips for improving their LinkedIn profile and what to share? Because I think it's a really interesting topic, and something that lots of people ask at the moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think your LinkedIn profile is obviously hugely important. I think to be found as well by recruiters, you need to have the right keywords and the right attributes in there. I think it's really important that you're looking at that and keeping that at the forefront of your mind. But I do think, actually, you know, it is about your network on LinkedIn and utilising that correctly. And I think if you're not reaching out to your network at the moment, I mean, you'll probably have people within your network that will have an intro or an in what you want to do. And I think it's really important that you're reaching out to your network. An innovative way to do that is by video. I think, you know, George mentioned that. And I think LinkedIn now have a feature where you can literally hit a record button and send a video to someone immediately. And it's quite a nice thing to do at the moment, you know, where you're checking in on someone just to see how they are. And would love to have a phone call whenever you're ready. And I think, you know, not receiving the traditional LinkedIn mail or the traditional email, actually getting to see someone leave you a video message is quite a nice thing. And yeah, I think just generally asking people for a 5-minute Zoom meeting or coffee, Zoom coffee would be a great way to open up your network at the moment.
I like that, Zoom coffee. Very good. Sarah, did you want to add in?
Actually, just backing up what Rohan said, I think it's so yeah, LinkedIn is great, and I think you know, absolutely writing original content, all that kind of thing. But I think it's the using the network thing and spreading yourself out. So certainly last year when I was looking for a role, obviously I spoke to a number of recruiters, but I also used my network and I wasn't shy. And I think it's, you know, we are a very well networked, connected industry, and, you know, don't be shy if there's something you really want to do. And I think what's been fantastic today is covering, you know, some of those sectors. Healthcare, I've never worked in healthcare. I feel like maybe that's the next sector. It's just, yeah, don't be shy, contact people and ask them, but be clear that, you know, you know what you want out of that conversation, because people are really busy, and it's all the obvious stuff really. But what's driving me mad is the amount of in-mail that I'm getting, and actually it's really off-putting when people are sending to me in LinkedIn, and I would much rather someone send me a personal note and and something useful than having something that's such an obvious sell-in. But yeah, I just, don't be shy. We, you know, use the people that you know, reconnect with people that you used to work with, and just ask for, you know, everyone is trapped in their homes, and I think, you know, happy to chat, and people always feel, I think, quite touched if you send them a note saying that you know you're really interested and you want their help. So yeah, don't be shy. That's
Thank you.
Flattery, Sarah.
Always on.
Just to add to that, I think also thinking about ways in which you can collaborate with other freelancers. So a lot of our freelancers on our platform then become clients because they look for other freelancers to work with. So they're a really good source of finding projects. So really kind of build up your own freelance community of different freelancers, whether that's people who can do social media or the internal side if you're an external person. And I think, you know, collaborating, coming together. And we have actually a tool on the platform where you can then collaborate with other freelancers and grow your own community.
And I forgot to say, actually, most of the and I've obviously in other roles have used freelancers. Most of the freelancers that I've used have come by recommendation. It often, if you're an organisation that maybe can't afford to go to a recruitment company, it often is because it was a friend of a friend, and that's why that networking element is so important, really.
Right. Thank you guys for that. We're going to move into our next section as time is flying. And this is more touching on sort of mental health during this time and using the time to build upon your skills. So handing over to Dominic for that particular section. So I think it's unmute your mic.
I'll just unmute myself, yeah. Need some tips on how to use Zoom properly, obviously. So the next question is, this section is all really about sort of mental health and well-being. And as you may know, next week is Mental Health Week. So the question for the panel really is if anyone's got any tips for maintaining their mental health and well-being as we spend most of our time at home. Who would like to jump in first?
I'll go. I think trying to carve out is really obvious. I mean, I'm not doing anything different to anyone else. Trying to carve out a bit of time for yourself. Obviously, exercise. I've been trying to do really, there's lots of free ones actually, but an online exercise class, no more than half an hour, but it's been a lifesaver for me, locking myself in a room and doing something like that. And then just connecting with people, and not always, you know, obviously everyone's using Zoom all the time, but I think sometimes having a normal call where you don't have to stare at someone's face, or worse still, your own face, which I'm sick to death of. But you know, we've all become obsessed with video calls. You can't call anyone now without looking at them, and I think it's quite healthy to not do that.
Can I just check, can I get a show of hands from the panel? Who's been doing the Joe Wicks workouts at all? So Rohan, have you been kind of tuning in but not that often?
I've been watching my daughters do it.
Oh, okay.
It's the other way around in my house. They watch me do it.
Yeah, I need top tips on how to get teenagers out of bed and doing their work. I think that's the biggest mental health issue that I've got.
Well, that is probably quite a good question to touch on, how people have found it juggling family life.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I joke. I think if I had younger children, it would be much harder. but yeah, suddenly you were all working, living together, cooking, 3 meals a day together, trying to sort of decide should they be allowed to chat to their friends and game, constantly on their iPads, and weigh all that up. And I think it is hard, and I'm much luckier than most that I've got space to get out and walk around. But I'm sure there's a huge impact, and that's why I'm quite for the sort of easing off that the government's doing in terms of allowing people to get out a little bit more, because I think mental health is such a big issue, and remaining in the state that we were in for too long could have had a huge impact.
Yeah, and I think it is a difficult juggling act about when you kind of ease the restrictions and how you keep the curve down. So I think that is going to be a difficult juggling act over the next few weeks and months. But yes, no, I can certainly empathise. I'm certainly not going to win any parenting awards.
But I've loved how you see you have so many Zoom conferences or webinars, and suddenly a child will appear. And, even the most corporate of clients that I have, suddenly this sort of little child pops up and everything becomes, much more human, and you sort of build different relationships as a result.
Yeah, I was thinking of getting my 6-year-old in just to kind of sort of humanise me a bit. But who else would like to chip in?
Yeah.
Go on, Rohan.
Thank you, Jane. So again, just coming back to the survey that we ran on the employees' view, it would definitely seem that employees need to be taking some of their own initiative, because they're not necessarily getting the relevant support from all of the employers, which is an unfortunate thing. I think the industry hasn't done too badly, although what we found is that 55% of people have said they have been negatively impacted from a mental health perspective, and 33% have been negatively impacted from a physical health perspective. But only 40% of employers had actually done anything and put extra measures in place around physical or mental health, of which majority of those 40% came from an in-house background. So I think agencies probably need to do a bit more. But what that was saying to me is that I think a lot of individuals need to take it upon themselves to make sure that they are looking after their own mental health, because it's not necessarily going to come from the company. So things like what's interesting, I've talked to some of our candidates about this, as well as our own employees. Just your desk setup, for example. I think people that haven't actually necessarily worked from home a lot before, maybe they worked at home once a week or even less, they probably still don't have the right tools to work from home. The screen at the right height, the right chair, etc. Working in a room with plenty of daylight. And I think it's important that we're looking at that, because not only will that affect your mental health, that will almost definitely impact your physical health too. And so I think it's important that you're going out of your way to research these things, because unfortunately not all employers are necessarily taking the initiative to do that. And I've spoken to some candidates where their employers have been active. They've asked them to send a photo of their desk setup so that they could go through almost a virtual assessment of their working setup. So do think about that, and it will have a massive impact on the way you work, your mental health and your physical health.
As you said that, I realised I wasn't sitting quite properly, so I've adjusted my posture. I'm actually sitting properly. Olivia, did you want to come in?
I think it's also really important to take care to sort of recognise that colleagues who have been furloughed could be feeling totally cut off, and actually, there isn't one blanket rule to how to engage. And actually, some people, yes, may want to take part in, jollies or quizzes or Zoom activities outside of work, but others don't. And actually, they would prefer to have, chat over text with their manager or with colleagues or a buddy, and just recognising that each person's going to have their own needs, and to have that sort of level of engagement that's tailored to that.
I think that brings me to one of my favourite topics, and actually I think it was Nigel again talking earlier about listening. You have to listen. You cannot make, even if it comes from a brilliant place of good intent, you can't make assumptions on behalf of other people. Don't do unto others as you wish to be done to. It's actually ask them how they would like to be treated. And because this is so uncharted, and because things are moving so fluidly, ask them regularly, because what suits them this week or this month is not going to work for next month. So I think, again, coming back to internal comms and actually internal dialogue, regular sort of pulse surveys, regular communications, and then actually taking on board what people have told you and listening to them. I think if we think about where we are from a sort of scientific or psychological perspective, we have all globally, collectively, as adults, especially us in the Western world, essentially had a great deal of control about our daily lives removed. So I think as employers, if you are able to try and help individuals try and return any form of control back to them about their working patterns, their working lives, that is tremendously helpful for your mental health and your well-being. So is it that, and I'm not saying this is for everyone, I'm working in the morning between 6 and 8 a.m. before anybody else is up. That's tremendously productive. It's not going to suit everybody, but could you then, and actually I know a team that have 2-hour lunch break because they've got up early and they've worked really hard. So it's that sort of fluidity. The other thing I was going to say from a very personal level, and again, as a natural born optimist, this doesn't sit easy, but actually my motto at the moment is lower your expectations, because this is a completely unique, different world. You can't run a business full-time, be a full-time parent, and suddenly morph into a fully qualified, smashing it head teacher. This is impossible for any human. So therefore, lower your expectations on all three fronts, be impact focused. What are the things that really, really matter and add value? And celebrate your wins. I mean, tiny, tiny, small stuff. Give yourself some slack and give yourself a break. So yeah, you're going to get that tattooed, lower your expectations.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So I do lots of stuff on behaviour change, and I was listening to a podcast about optimism bias the other day, and that's that thing where people are, particularly with projects, they have this kind of optimism, and there's this bias that we can do this or we can do that, or we can deliver a project on time, and actually it happens time and time again that people kind of have unrealistic expectations of what they can achieve, and sometimes you need to have much, I suppose, more, I would say, realistic expectations and kind of set the target accordingly. But as human beings, we're not great at doing that. Nigel, I was just going to ask you, is there anything on the PR Freelancers Facebook page in particular? Have you picked up anything around mental health and well-being or anything like that at all, and what people are kind of saying in terms of how they're finding it or what support they need or don't have, that kind of thing?
Just a general sense of, the stress that people are under, the uncertainty that is just, manifests itself in them in the way that people post, what they post. Nobody's really, calling out for, in crisis. But if there are any freelancers listening to this who aren't in that group, so obviously it's free to enter, 3,500 people, and it's a very, very supportive group. It gets about 10,000 comments a month. So, it's a very busy place. And yeah, it moderates itself, but it is a very supportive place. Every Friday we have a thread which is to celebrate wins, to celebrate things. And I've also introduced a separate thread which is, called Friends and Family, which is where you can post stuff that isn't about PR during the crisis. If you have a need that you think someone in the group can help, because you think 3,500 clever, resourceful people might know somebody that can introduce you to something else that can solve something in your life, then sort of introduce that as well. Hasn't particularly been well used by anybody yet. Nobody's really hollered for help that isn't PR related. But yeah, it's a good letting off steam opportunity. My only other bit of advice, to add to those things is, something that probably freelancers know very well, which is just try as best you can to have hard limits on your day. It's very easy to have the laptop on the kitchen table or in the next room, and just to keep going back to it and going back to it and going back to it. And I find that myself. I'm forever drifting back to my desk, at night to go and do something else or fiddle with something, and it just becomes progressively, everything leaches into the next, and you do need that separation.
No, good advice. Does anyone else have any good tips for having that work-life balance? And I suppose as freelancers, as you say, Nigel, for a lot of us, the difficulty is to sort of maintain that. Or as you can see from my setup, you've got a kind of dining room table and a crossplane on my desk here, so it's all kind of in one room. So I certainly find it difficult to maintain that balance. Has anyone else got any good tips, thoughts, or suggestions, Jane?
A couple of things actually to sort of bookend the day. One thing I have found personally quite useful, and I stole from somewhere else, is I'm massively enjoying not having a 2-hour commute. However, it's that physical cue that you have moved from one activity in one place to another. So you may not, be in a beautiful farmstead like lucky old Alice, but can you at least walk to the bottom of your stairs and back, or can you actually? Have been engaging with a child psychologist who said actually that my son might benefit from wearing at least some of his school uniform, so that is a signal to him that he's doing something different. So there's that, walk around your house at the beginning and the end of the day and you signify a switch. Again, stolen with pride from somebody else. Coming back to that point about we're doing everything via Zoom and via video, a colleague of mine at the end of the day has a chat with a colleague, but somebody that she also counts as a friend, so ordinarily should be going to the pub. But actually it's a phone call, and they do that while they're doing their exercise, they're walking around the block or whatever. So you are kind of downloading, unwinding, especially if you live alone, but it is segueing between the pure work and into the evening. And then hopefully it makes it harder to slip back after that.
Yeah, I think to be honest and you don't always have to pretend everything's hunky-dory. Obviously no one wants to kind of moan on all the time, because it's pretty tough most of the time, but I think you can be really honest about how you're feeling, and you don't have to kind of have this insta ready life all the time. I think everyone's in the same boat, and everyone feels pretty shit one day and then okay the next, and maybe actually quite ecstatic on a Saturday. But I think that it just gets steadily worse as the week goes on. We're all in the same boat, and I don't think anyone would disrespect you if you felt like saying that. Sometimes I don't think we have to always be happy. I think PR people are such pleasers, and we always want to be really positive and happy and optimistic. And sometimes you don't feel that way, and that's okay. I don't, share. I've always got Nikki to share all my woes with. And I think it's really important, as you say, Jane, at the end of the day, just to sometimes let rip and download how you feel.
I think that there's that's a great point. I think there's a great app that I actually bought for my whole team, which is called the Kite Support app, and it's only £4.99. It's been built specifically for COVID-19 period. Well, for COVID-19, and it's really it's been built by 6 wellbeing experts, and it's done in small bite-sized chunks, and it really focuses on 6, I think it's around 8 different modules of your well-being, and I think it's just a great thing to do, and it gives you a bit of escapism. It tells you not to be so hard on yourself. It gives you all the right support in the way that I think is definitely needed. And definitely coming back to Jane's point, just a bit of aftershave made me feel up for this meeting. So yeah, I definitely go with it.
I'll just jump in. I agree with everything that's been said. I think looking at things like apps that can help you, meditation, I think is very important. Obviously setting your boundaries as much as you can, getting changed for work, if that is something that can help prompt you. But also taking pressure off. Sometimes you're going to have a crap day. It's okay to say, actually, I'm not doing anything today. I'm going to come back and start afresh tomorrow, and maybe have a duvet day. It's fine. Don't feel guilty about needing that kind of mental relief, because there's lots going on. So I think that's an important thing to remember as well during these really difficult times. And just to also reach out to those of your friends, reach out to people that you usually contact, because sometimes we're so in our own bubbles of what's going on in our world that we forget that there is a life outside, and maybe talk to somebody that, will cheer you up, someone who always makes you laugh, or watch some comedies. It's one of my favorite things to do if I'm feeling down. I'm like, bring on the chocolate and some comedies. Great.
Mm-hmm. Very good advice. I'm feeling much more happy and positive. It's amazing how when you kind of people sort of share positive things and talk about doing things like that. It is amazing how it kind of lifts your mood and does make you feel more positive. And actually just saying it and doing it and thinking about it and thinking about how you can do positive stuff does make a difference. So on that note, has anyone else got anything they would like to share? And then I think we'll go back to some of the questions on the chat.
All I was going to say was agreeing with what everybody said, essentially. I think, George, I love it when people say that you're allowed to feel a bit shit, because you're right, like PR people, we've always got a big smile on our face, we've always got to be always on, and there's something very healthy to say, I'm feeling a bit down. I absolutely, I think it's about having the right support network. In any point in your life where you have something crappy happen to you, it's knowing who you can rely on and the people that will give you good advice, who will make you laugh. Great News on Netflix is a really good series. I recommend that. It's a Tina Fey comedy. Also, the other thing that I found has helped, because I'm in a 1-bedroom flat in Croydon with no garden, trapped with me and my new fiance. We basically got engaged. We had a leap year proposal, and then we got locked up in the same flat together. So if that lasts. But what's made a difference is actually having flowers in the house. So I have like fresh flowers on my desk. Just the smell of the flowers makes me feel like less like I'm trapped inside. But I think the key thing about mental health is like what works for you doesn't necessarily work for other people. And I think because of the whole Insta thing, and it makes you feel bad because someone's just done a 20k run and all you've done is moved from from the dining room to the sofa, is that it's your mental health and only you know really how to cheer yourself up and what works. The one thing I would love to see, actually, a little bit like the flexible working, is that organisations start to realise how important mental health really is. And Jane will know this, Ebony knows this. I did the 2-day mental health first aid course a few years ago after doing the half-day line manager course. And I think employers, it's well worth them doing that course, because I think it helps if you actually, understand empathy. So, I'd love to see that. Obviously that's very much an organisational point of view, but I'd love to see that shift really.
Do you know, that's a really interesting point, actually. My morning dog walk is a staple of mine, and that's physical exercise and being out in nature, and it's mindfulness, and it's my time. And that's kind of where I do a lot of my best thinking. And actually only this morning, Sarah, I was thinking about at Hanbury, we had booked for the beginning of April 2-day mental health first aider training. And, the trainer came back very quickly and said, not really appropriate to do this. We'll postpone it till the summer, as we said. But actually, if many of us are going to be doing this remotely for many, many months to come, and yet the need is exponential, I feel like as an organisation, as an entity, MHFA needs to figure out an alternative way to deliver that. So I'm having this half thought that it's on my to-do list. I'll start lobbying and figuring that out. And maybe it's modularised, or, as a trainer, I have done a full day's training via Zoom. There's ways and means to do it, but I don't think that, the value of it is too significant with the current need to not think laterally. So
I'd lobby with you on that, because I think, from our point of view of a global organisation, we're actually seeing now a lot of colleagues in different countries actually reaching out to, because we've obviously got a set of mental health first aiders that are coming to us that haven't been before, and I think it's slightly I think because you can deliver training over Zoom, and it's it is absolutely really, really important because of all the changes and the feelings of isolation. It's like a prolonged Christmas period. And that we know that's not a great period for mental health for some people. So I'm more than happy to send a few emails to them, because they are.
That's our next campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get involved.
Okay. I'll just move it on to one of the questions we had earlier on, which was just around whether the panel feel there's an opportunity to raise issues and lobby government around working conditions for freelancers, so things like holidays, sick pay, maternity, paternity, all that kind of thing, and whether anyone had any thoughts on that. Or not.
Don't rush.
I'm not a lobbyist, but kind of common sense tells me that if you're having conversations, if you're lobbying on any level, why not throw the whole kitchen sink at it? And I think actually in the notes, I sort of likened it to the narrative that I'm seeing around, if we are going to reboot and restart the economy, let's do it in a green and sustainable way. So if we are looking at employment practices, let's look at everything we can do collectively to improve things. And this collective, movement is such a major importance for the UK economy. And as we're looking to reboot it, why wouldn't you look to enable these people to be supported and empowered in every way possible? So what have we got to lose? I think if the ear's open and the doors are open, I concur.
I mean, I think also we do though have to think about the different types of freelancers that there are, and there's obviously freelancers that are on payroll and freelancers that are limited companies or sole traders, and so not one thing fits all. And with increased lobbying and demands from government will come increased regulation, and perhaps areas that freelancers don't like. So I think there is a careful balance also to be had on both sides.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because where would that money come from, in the sense that part of the choice of going freelance is you have certain risks and you have certain benefits. And I can see at the minute it's worked out not in everyone's favour, but I think you build your rate based on the fact that you don't have holiday pay. You have to build that into your day rate, and that's how it works. So I think if you were then to have holiday pay and sick pay, then that would have an effect on your rate. So I think you need to weigh up quite carefully what it is you want to do there. And as you say, Alice, there's very different types of freelancers. The ones we work with are career freelancers. They have a portfolio of businesses they work for. They're very aware of the benefits they have from working this way, the softer benefits, and the risks that involves as well. I'm not sure that would be something they would want to lobby for particularly, because I think they build that already into quite high day rates and the way they work. But I could be wrong.
Thank you very much. My final question for you guys is just around, we did touch on, using your skills or using this downtime to build on, skills. Is there anything that you guys would recommend at all? Or would you say, internal comms, I'd say would be one, So because I'm going to say CIPR, PRCA, they've got lots of online courses at the moment. Some of them are offering it for free for freelancers to use. So, and that's something that I would definitely recommend. I also recommend, looking at ways to diversify your skills. So, for example, I created an online DIY PR training course for small businesses. I did that a while back, so that's still going well. I've also done online courses around, how to become a successful consultant and blah, blah. So I do think it's important that we're taking our skills and looking at repackaging it and looking at other ways to create, residual income besides just relying on one as a freelancer. I just wanted to open up to the panel whether there was any thoughts around that in particular.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. And, when you've got a bit more time on your hands, then it's a time for creativity and a time to explore the things that you've perhaps always had a passion to explore. And I think, we've talked about mental health, but keeping yourself busy, feeling that you're trying to drive yourself out of current situation also helps your mental health. So everything ties up. And if you do have extra time and you're not sort of juggling kids and work and projects that you've got, then think about new areas, or just enjoy having that time. There's no harm in saying, do you know what, the next 2 months I'm not going to be so busy, and I'm just going to have a bit of time off. So it's whatever I think is right for you as an individual is important.
Yeah, I totally agree, Alice. I think if you do want to fill your time, you can also work on your personal brand. I think, just focusing on what you want your brand to look like, whether that be writing blogs, whether that be acquiring skills in a new area, updating your LinkedIn profile, whether that be reaching out to a network and letting them know what you're doing right now. Definitely work and focus on your personal brand. Look, if you're looking to go and make a transition into a new sector or into a new industry, even think about volunteering or doing some courses in that space.
Thank you, guys. Anybody else want to jump in before I start to wrap up?
I was actually going to, yet again, panelist telepathy, I was going to talk about personal brand. The only other thing, I guess, borrowing slightly from coaching territory, is if you are really having a reboot and really navel gazing and looking at your personal brand, you might want to, for anyone that's sort of started out on a coaching journey, very often the coach will suggest that you talk to a network of people that have known you for a long time over the years, and feedback on what your strengths are. And if you are feeling a little bit discombobulated, you're suffering a little bit from confidence, and you're trying to get up the bravery to pivot or to be proactive, that can be an incredibly gratifying experience, actually, to collate, 8 to 10 lots of really considered positive feedback, and could help refine your thinking and reassure as you go forward. So, somebody said earlier, people are flattered if you reach out to them, and especially if they're people that know and love you and have done over the years, they would love to do that for you, I'm sure. And it's a really powerful boost.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I wanted to bring in Sarah, because can we flag our mentoring scheme? I think that's a great thing to do while we've got, downtime for people wanting to apply and get some help.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, just to back up Jane's point, I did do what you just described many, many years ago, and did it wasn't like a 360, it was like 180, where I asked everybody to tell me nice things about myself, don't tell me all the bad stuff. And it is a fantastic exercise to do when you are looking at your brand and like what you stand for. But yeah, I think absolutely free courses, and 100%. How can we not plug the Women in PR mentoring scheme that we launched this week? Sorry, it is only for women, but we have for the first time introduced some male mentors on the scheme, so we can kind of drive some of that sort of reverse mentoring. So I was a mentee back in 2015. And it had a big impact on me in terms of a lot of my career decisions since then, which have all been reasonably positive. George obviously ran the previous scheme. So, so if you are, please apply for the scheme. And fundamentally, even if you don't get on the scheme, that flattery thing, people are always happy to share their expertise and to support each other. So apply for the scheme, but if you don't get on the scheme, look at that LinkedIn network and see who'll be happy to chat to you.
Right, thank you so much.
It's a bit of an obvious plug, but it would be
No, we appreciate that. No, thank you. And just before you guys go, do you want to give out your social media handles? We've got a few people in the chats that want to know how to contact you guys. And a big thank you, massive thank you for you all taking the time out to participate. Much appreciated. It's going to be recorded, it's going to be shared out. We'll send you links once it's all up and running. But please feel free to plug your socials before it times out in about 3 minutes.
Yes, and I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who joined us virtually, and thank you to the panel for sharing your time. It's been really, really useful, and I hope you've all found it a useful couple of hours.
Great. Thank you very much for having us all.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
And congratulations, Sarah, on getting engaged.
Oh, I only know female thing, aren't I? Like doing, but it is something hilarious about it literally happening and then realising we have only seen each other now for 2 months.
And you're still engaged.
We're still engaged. It is a top tip, actually, that my sister told me that reduces rows, is that if you say darling after the end of a sentence, honestly, top tip makes such a difference. It stops it from escalating.
We'll try this.
Thank you. You can follow me on at Sarah Sammy. I'm the only Sarah Sammy that exists in the UK, so I'm very easy to find.
Brilliant. Olivia? You got a social handle, or is it just Elwood Atfield, their main one to follow?
I was just so Olivia Freeman from Elwood Atfield. You can find me on LinkedIn, and everything will be linked to that.
Brilliant. Alice?
Alice Waitman on LinkedIn is really the best one.
Okay, Jane?
I've written it down. I can't remember what I am on LinkedIn, but I'm all over it. And at 40ham on Twitter.
Okay. And Rohan?
Rohan Shah on LinkedIn and at Romy44 on Twitter.
Cool. Nigel?
At the PR Cavalry on the Twitters and Nigel Starbucks on LinkedIn. There's only one of us on Google.
That's right. And George, thank you.
At the PR Network or at George Blizzard on Twitter, and I think you'll find me. There's not many Blizzards on LinkedIn as well, so let's share it on that.
Brilliant. Well, a massive thank you to you all, and hope to see you guys soon anyway, outside of lockdown. Take care.
Great. Thanks so much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.